Hi, Lisa. Thank you so much for joining us and having all the students on board with us for the today's session and addressing all their queries. So we've collated a lot of queries from the students' questions regarding the institute, regarding the employment prospects, job roles, skills, scope, and a lot of things. And we're going to be flooding a lot of questions at your end. And I'm sure the students are going to be really benefited with all the information and all the insights that we can from the industry and how the economy looks like and how everything looks like in the risk domain and the risk space. So welcome aboard. And just a couple of opening remarks for us. So Lisa is the Vice President at GARP, and we're going to be having a discussion focused on the FRM exams. Lisa, please.
Good evening, everyone. I'm sorry it's morning here and I'm not done my first cup of coffee. As Aswini said, my name is Lisa Ponti. I'm the Vice President for Educational Outreach here at GARP. One of my mandates is to help raise awareness among universities and industry about our Financial Risk Manager program, as well as our certificate in sustainability and climate risk. My own personal background prior to working for GARP was in academia as well as commercial banking. So I have a little bit of a different perspective on a lot of things. So hopefully I'll be able to answer your questions. If there's something I can't answer, I know from my days of teaching, I will not make it up, but I will find out the correct answer for you. I will put my email in the chat box. And if you have follow-up questions, you can feel free to email me those.
Thank you so much for that introduction and to allow us to send all the queries to you directly as well. So let's jump right into it. The first question that I want to ask is with regards to the scope and something which is very commonly asked by the students, and I face this question quite often. So can AI replace the job of a risk manager? So I had just posted something on Instagram and just scribbled something a while back. That is, AI will replace you if your I is A, if your intelligence is artificial. So any thoughts on this, particularly with respect to the risk industry?
I would say no, because actually AI and machine learning are of a significant interest to risk management. And GARP through the FRM has been covering these topics for several years now. Coverage began as just readings in the FRM Part 2 current issues in risk management section, but now these topics are being fully integrated into our permanent curriculum. In Part 1, we examine various machine learning methods. Someone has to be behind the algorithms and what we're using. And so we look at machine learning and prediction and different types of machine learning methodology. Then in Part 2, we continue to explore these recent trends in how AI is used in the financial sector, which includes issues that banks and regulators are going to be facing as a result of using AI in their modeling and validation process, whether there's bias, are these models fair, the ethical considerations, things of that nature. So no, it may change the nature of a job, but it's not going to replace it.
Perfect. Actually, I've been teaching FRM for a while. So yes, current issues we had in this time, we got the ML AI chapter added to the part 1 quants portion as well. Absolutely. And we've seen how Silicon Valley Bank has performed and how important the risk function has become. And also with regards to when we're looking at the space of risk, I was reading this book by Morgan Housel, the book called Same as Ever. And in the chapter on risk, it was noted very clearly in terms of the surprise human element is something that we cannot exactly forecast. So that human element is always going to be required with AI. Absolutely. Next question, when we're looking at the financial risk management and especially the level 2 curriculum, wherein the operational risk has got a little bias towards the banking sector. So what other areas of application do we see in terms of risk management?
You mean for the FRM broadly? Of
Yes.
course. Well, conceptually, financial risk management is an issue for any organization. Admittedly, financial risk manager, financial risk, we are, very much in financial services, but in the consulting industry as well as others, liquidity risk is not just a financial institution concern. Anyone who has a balance sheet has liquidity risk. Any firm will have counterparty credit risk. Whether you are a lender or simply a supplier, you can be exposed to counterparty risk. And that applies across the board. Operationally, non-financial risks, cybersecurity, all of those things, those pose risks to firms across the board. Admittedly, we are very much, our audience has generally been dominated by financial services, but the applicability is not limited to that industry.
So just a follow-up question on the same. So we do have a lot of students who are from the non-commerce background, if I were to say so, as in they do not have a background in terms of finance prior to this, or in accounting or business or management. And when we're looking at participants or students or candidates who come from the software and IT companies background as well. So what or how do we see their skill set matching or complementing those of the risk space, FRM particularly, and how do we see their scope in the industry?
Well, I have always felt that financial background per se isn't necessary. For the FRM, admittedly, what is necessary, what is more important, I think, is a general facility with numbers, statistics, the quantitative side of things. And could have developed that as an undergraduate in an engineering program, in a mathematics program. There's many different ways to skin that cat, to be honest. And so it's not necessarily the knowledge of the finance per se, but you do need to be comfortable with quantitative methods. Part one is designed to lay out for any candidate all of the basic tools that you're going to need. When I speak to student groups, one of the things I like to warn them about is, if you didn't like statistics when you went through it the first time as an undergrad, or in my case, I went through it three different times, 3 different degrees, I said, you're going to see that again. And that is really more important. We have a whole domain on financial markets and products. So we can help you learn about those areas. But the facility, some people just, numbers aren't their thing, or they're intimidated by it. That's the skill that you need to have coming in, and you can get that in many different majors.
Right. Totally agreed on that. So again, with regards to the scope of risk management and FRM, so is there anything that you would like to highlight with regards to FRM in India, FRM in US, and FRM globally at large? So in terms of, again, the scope, the application, jobs, industry.
I wasn't sure what exactly you were talking about, but we can talk a little bit about India, for example. I mean, obviously that would be very relevant to the audience, because the financial sector in India is developing. The banking and consulting industries are also growing and maturing and having a need for more people in the risk management sphere. You have global banks, as I'm sure you're all well aware, who have set up offices that, they serve the local Indian market and they help support global operations. And the Indian banks themselves, not just the foreign banks, but they are, constantly looking to hire skilled people who have risk management, a skill set. And so this is creating new jobs in the region. Banking regulation is also going to impact risk management as regulation intensifies in certain regions, particularly in India. They're going to focus on the need for better risk management practices. And a lot of the national and private banks have started pursuing risk management more seriously. We've seen this in a lot of countries. As financial markets develop, then they can focus on risk management. Sometimes that's not always top of mind, and that's very fair. When your markets are still developing, you have other concerns. Here at GARP, we have trying to raise awareness of risk management and support finance professionals in India. We've been working with the Indian Institute of Banking and Finance for a while now to offer our financial risk and regulation educational program, which I can talk more about, but you're really here to talk about the FRM. So I'll kind of focus on that. And we've brought on a few new university partners in India who have programs that are, helping to promote best practices in risk management. They're developing FRM-related curriculum within their degree programs. They are seeing some really, really good growth in the region. And the FRM is the global standard. We're not the only one, but we are considered to be the most rigorous and basically the gold standard. And as I said, non-financial institutions need risk managers too, whether you're in fintech or energy companies and e-commerce. There's a lot of different industries where this risk management is going to be really important.
Absolutely. When we're looking at companies like even the social media companies and the data risk that they carry, and the IT risk and cyber risk for the banks, and cyber risk is, I think, relevant for every single company today with e-commerce and the e-platforms that they're working with. And as you mentioned about the regulation, so RBI, that is the central bank in India as well, so they also have a mandate to have a certain number of risk professionals in the banking system. In fact, recently one of my students became risk officer of a bank. Moving forward to the skill set, deviating a little bit from the jobs and the industry part and moving into the skill set that is required. So one very common question that I get again is that what is the level of, or what kind of coding skills are needed? So let me break this question into 2 or 3 parts for you. So first of all, does every risk management job require coding? I can fairly see that no, there would be different kinds of profiles.
Okay, the short answer to that question is no, but let me elaborate if I might. When I arrange for panels of FRMs to speak to a university with me, and they talk about their jobs specifically and their companies, if I have 4 FRMs with me, they all have different jobs, they all do slightly different things, and all work for different companies. And what I hear when I have these presentations is that programming skills are great to have. And actually, they're a very good complement to the FRM because that is not something that is covered as part and parcel of our curriculum. However, which, Excel, Python, or which program you look at is going to be very company specific. I've had panels where every individual had a different program that they used. And so a lot of those skills, if you have, again, the facility and the way of thinking about it, you're going to be able to pick up what the company is using when you get there. If it's an elective, if you're studying right now as a student and there's an elective and it's something that's of interest to you, by all means, jump on it. But I think, a lot of these programs, it's less about the program itself and the ability to think about it. Switching over to another to fit the company should be relatively easy. And as programming, changes, again, what was being used 10 years ago wasn't being used 5 years ago, might not be used, 2 years from now.
So when I look at this particular question with the students, so what I tell them is that, see, Microsoft Excel is something the most basic, which is going to be most popularly used across. And whenever you're working with any kind of data. And then comes the question between the more popular ones, that is R, SQL and Python, where SQL is more in terms of database. And out of R and Python, Python is what I see more preferred one with most of the companies, since it can do much more than R. And it can do almost more or less the same functions that R can also do. So extending this question, what kind of roles would you see coding being very important for, or as a very important mandatory skill set? And what kind of roles in risk would you think that coding is not as such needed? It might be an added advantage, but not needed as such.
Well, there are certain areas of risk management that are more qualitative in nature, operational risk. If you're in market risk or some of the more quantitative areas, the coding might become more important. And to be honest, it is going to be something that entry-level employees are going to use. You don't see your candidate, the chief risk officer, he's not grinding things out in R or Python. He has someone to do all that. So that brings up my other point, that I think a soft skill that students really need to think about, and I know it's hard for a lot of students. I know this because I taught for 10 years. I get it. But the communication skills. It's not enough to be able to sit at the computer and code in R and come up with this, grand algorithm. If you can't explain that algorithm, what it does, why you need it, and what its output means to someone above you. You hear this a lot from faculty, of these very highly quantitative programs, and they're like, oh, that's one of the things we like about the FRM is that they make you look at all the different facets of risk management, because you can't, if you want to move forward, you need to be able, to get buy-in, to explain yourself. And it's not an easy skill. I understand that. I know that. But it is one that, because it's not easy, I think a lot of students kind of blow it off a little, ignore it until it's too late. And then, and then you just make it harder for yourself. But a lot of entry-level analytic jobs are going to require that you either use programs that they're already creating. I don't know that you'll actually have to create your own, but you better be able to explain what you're doing, because you're going to be talking to people, that didn't learn Python or R.
Absolutely second you on that. And I was, as you were answering this question, I was contemplating that I used to use Excel a lot more 5 years or 10 years back as compared to what I use now. Because again, the team uses it and I'm more in terms of designing as to what I want and how I want it. And they get the execution done. So yes.
Oh, Aswini, if you could see the spreadsheets I used to use when I was a credit analyst 100 years ago. I mean, so basic, just, but to be honest, even the most basic Excel spreadsheet can give you an idea about cash flow. You know what I mean? If you're a credit analyst and you're looking at, a counterparty or a customer, you don't necessarily always need really high level skills. Again, it's also about understanding. What do those numbers mean? What are they telling you?
And that's the human element. Yes, so that's the human element that you bring
That's
to.
what can't be replaced.
Yes, absolutely. And I think the communication is a problem and a requirement in all the roles. When I interact with people in the office and outside as well, being able to explain, being able to communicate what they actually mean is something that is surprisingly a little lacking, and that needs to be really built upon. So totally you hit the nerve there. Moving forward to the next question. So do you think something like financial modeling would be also relevant for the FRM candidates, or it's more about credit modeling and the other ways of modeling data and analyzing? If we are to learn in Excel, then what kind of modeling or skills should we work on in the risk space?
Again, because risk can be applied in so many ways, the specific skills you want to work on, to be honest, should be ones that are of interest to you, that you have a certain level of confidence, because you're going to direct your own career. We're probably going to touch on this multiple times, but the decisions you make are very personal. And
Yes.
People that sit for the FRM, admittedly, tend to be very quantitative in nature. They may be doing, traditional liquidity risk or market risk analytics, or, or they could be in financial modeling. But again, what you choose will influence the positions you're going to look for, and then the skills that you're going to pursue. And the one thing about the FRM, again, is that it's sort of very complementary, because we don't get into all of that modeling. If you can pick that up and you have a facility, all skills are going to be helpful. You may not use them all to every degree in every position, but it again, I go back to it's the ability to think about the problem and be able to construct the model, to analyze it in whatever area you're going to be looking at.
So I keep on telling them that, you need to invest in yourself. You need to really work on all the areas. You do not know when which skill is going to be coming in handy at what point of time in your career.
Absolutely. And the other thing I want to point out to students is that you don't have to have everything the day after you take your cap and gown off, right? Employers love employees that want to learn, okay?
Yes.
And I know budgets are a little tighter than they used to be. I mean, honestly, again, at the risk of dating myself, when you started at a bank back in the day, and some banks may still do this, but the ones in the US haven't done it for a very long time, they had entire programs where you would cycle through the bank and you would work in treasury and you would work in lending and you would be back in back office ops for a month at a time, and you do this whole rotation and learn about all facets of the bank and then pick your path. So what I see for a lot of students is that they may be generalist at the beginning and get the entry-level job and say, hey, this is the area I really like. They might not have started out in risk management and will still be here. And if they find that they need certain skills, go back and get them. I hate to break it to students, I always feel bad saying this, but you're going to be learning for the rest of your life.
Yes.
And if you're not learning, then you have a problem. Again, my bias as a former educator is completely showing. I apologize. But lifelong learning is going to be key. And, even if it's just picking up a Coursera course while you're working, and saying, hey, I need this skill. Don't ever be afraid, to take on some new learning, even if it's not, even if it's not the FRM, a programming, a communications course, whatever it happens to be.
No, this is actually very, very true, and especially given the way things are changing today. We have the digital money coming in. We had the UPI in India just a few years back launched in, and the way we are looking at the technology space changing and the risk being so important with respect to technology. So today, somebody has to understand that you have to be absolutely on your toes in terms of learning, and you cannot work the way 20 or 30 years back it used to be, where generations after generation could be doing in a very similar kind of fashion with less amount of change in the economy and the way of working. So with regards to the, apart from banking, what are the other areas in finance that an FRM candidate can look at?
Oh, in finance, well, there's investment banking, which I don't know if you're distinguishing between commercial and investment banking. And again, there are positions in the real economy that would benefit from someone having FRM skills. As I mentioned earlier, every company has liquidity and credit risk. Every company is going to be impacted by market risk depending on what their operations are. And so they're going to need people with that skill set, and that's any industry. And the consulting industry in particular, consulting firms, if they're in order to serve their clients best, particularly if those clients are in financial services or others, they need to understand the risks that their clients are facing, what opportunities are popping up as a result, because risk management isn't always bad. Everybody thinks of it as being bad, and it's really, in and of itself, it's not. There are opportunities, there are threats, there are things that need to be mitigated, but other things that could be pursued. Operational risk exists everywhere in every industry. So if you want to work in supply chain management, look at the airlines, for heaven's sake. They need risk managers. Good God.
Right, absolutely. I was also taking down a couple of notes while you were answering this question. Moving on, what kind of roles specifically we could be looking at in terms of maybe very quantitative application-based roles, since we talked about statistics as we started?
Well, there are analysts on trading desks. There are analysts in treasury departments. Again, like I said, most of our FRMs, their titles somewhere in there include analyst. And you may have analysts looking at market risk, doing portfolio analysis, credit risk in the lending function, or again in the real economy, effectively lending to your customers. We have some that work a little more broadly, less quantitatively. We have some that are doing, geopolitical risk analysts. There's a mindset to being an analyst. Again, facility with numbers, an ability to interpret those numbers and to explain them back. A lot of our early careerists are working on the trading space, in the lending space, in the treasury area. Whether it's, in the treasury area, whether it's in the real economy or in a financial institution.
Particular difference that you notice in terms of the roles and job roles, the kind of job roles that FRM candidates get in India versus they get in US?
The way India's markets have developed, I think the jobs are going to be very similar, and they're going to become more similar as the markets continue to, to mature and evolve. And as you mentioned, the central bank, and as regulators require, have higher thresholds for their banks, that it's going to become very similar to what you would see in the EU or in the US.
Right, actually, we've been catching up very quickly with the UPI and the quantum of transactions that's happening digitally with the digital rupee as well. And the regulators, both SEBI, that is a stock market regulator, and RBI, the central bank, they both have been actually doing quite a good job, in my opinion, and syncing up with respect to technology as well. Central bank particularly. Moving forward to one of the other areas of questions students have, that is around the compensation and the income. They want a number. And I find it very difficult to give them a number, because you get questions wherein, okay, so if I do part one, then how much salary will I get? Or a part two, and how much salary will I get? I know it's very contextual in terms of the amount of experience you have and the skill set you have, but still, what kind of compensation can we look at for a part two qualified candidate with and without experience?
Okay. Well, I did have to consult with my colleagues who are on the ground in India on this question, because I was a grossly underpaid analyst 100 years ago. But anyway, I digress. We have learned that, broadly speaking, a salary for an FRM could range anywhere from, and I apologize, I should have checked this, but I would say, 5 lakhs. Am I pronouncing that correctly,
Yeah,
Aswini? Because
lakhs.
I wrote down notes and I wasn't,
Yes.
I should have asked how to pronounce. Okay, so 5 lakhs annually if you have maybe, no experience to up to maybe 2 years of work experience. And then it might jump a little higher to say 28 to 33 lakhs if you have, 5 to 6 years of work experience. And it is, as you pointed out, very hard because it's going to depend on the company, how they structure their revenue. To give you, an example, someone that works for an investment bank, Goldman Sachs or something like that, you might get, a higher base because, they pay more, but you might get stock options, okay? Not necessarily cash bonus. Stock bonuses are very popular. They tie you to the company. There's a whole thing, there's a whole mentality with those. Whereas if you're at a consulting firm, your bonuses might be tied to your clients. And startups, they're trying very hard to attract
Yes.
employees as well. And so your compensation there might be a little bit more variable. A startup in particular doesn't have a whole lot of history. They have no history or very little history of, cash flow. What are we going to have available to pay people? Some banks will have different kinds of perks on top of the salaries. It's always, you tend to get higher pay if you're in the urban centers versus out in the suburbs, compared to or smaller cities. It will depend on the individual as well, not just your certification, like whether or not you have the FRM. Where'd you go to school? Particularly domestically, whether in the US or anywhere, to be honest, where you're familiar with the school, that's going to signal something. If I'm evaluating a candidate from here in the US and they tell me, oh, I have a degree from Stanford or they have a degree from NYU, my alma mater, like I know about that school. However, when you talk internationally, I'm not familiar with every college that's come down the pike, but domestically, people are going to know where you went to school as well.
Right, and as you mentioned, so the schooling is actually very, very important because it's the formative years and it's the grooming that you're getting. But at the same time, I've seen quite a few students who have really worked up in case they did not have that level of exposure during school. They've actually made it a point to compensate or to catch up, rather, I would say, while in college and post college in terms of being exceptionally proactive with academics as well as other areas in order to level up and match up with the peers. And as we all see how competitive space, the jobs, the market, the economy, the businesses, startups, everything can be. I get this part. So now, what is recent work experience considered in terms of when candidates are being hired, when companies are hiring FRM? What is a basic level of experience they would be comfortable with when they hire candidates for, let's say, risk specific roles, market risk, treasury risk, and all that we were discussing? So what is the level of experience?
If you're looking at more of an entry level hire, the amount of experience, they're going to look at what they've been exposed to. Do they have a quantitative background? It's going to depend a lot on the position itself. I've done it, and it's really an art, to be honest.
Yeah.
A lot of positions, I will be really honest with the students, is about fit. That know about the company before, again, now I'm teaching you interviewing 101, but know about the company because you need to fit into that team. You need to know what that team does. You need to figure out, how best to contribute, because to be very honest, companies will help you get to where you need to be. Like they will train you up. If you're a little lacking, if you have a facility with numbers and you have, you've worked in a professional space, they're going to be more concerned with how are you going to fit with my team. And again, that goes back to the soft skills that we talked about at the beginning of the presentation.
What is the kind of pay scale that we look at in the US? Because there are a lot of students in the US as well, and a lot of them planning to shift or migrate to the US.
Well, that depends on the day of the week, honestly. If you read about markets and things like that, consultants were hiring. Now consultants are laying people off. They don't have enough projects for their analysts. Some of the bigger shops, to be very honest, are pushing off start date for some of their candidates, even from top B schools that they're recruiting from. They're getting them and they're saying, well, we want your start date rather than to be June 30th or whatever. They're saying we need to push you back because we don't have enough projects. That's going to depend on, honestly,
how the economy is basically.
I mean, I've seen analyst positions, under 100. I've seen well over 100, depending on the organization. In the US, positions, they're required to put the salary base, like certain states, New York, Colorado, they are required on LinkedIn. You see it now, because that's always the hardest part about a job interview, right? Is the compensation, because they ask you what you want. You don't want to outbid yourself, but you don't want to, undersell yourself either. It's a very hard thing, but they are requiring more and more across the board for companies to post the range, so that you have a general idea of what you're going to be looking at. And like I said, that can be, 90s to well over 100 USD.
So just for the students, 100 is $100,000.
Oh, I'm sorry, 100,000. Yes, excuse me.
No, not a problem. What do you recommend to students who are already working in a non-risk domain and they want to shift? They want to take up the FRM exams and shift into something related to the risk domain. So how to capitalize on the existing experience and how to move into the risk domain while having a previous experience?
Well, one of the things I suggest for students, by the way, when we talk about the FRM, to complete the certification, you must document 2 years of relevant work experience in order to finish the FRM and become certified after you pass the exams. And one of the things I tell students to do is, when they look at their job experience, take the learning objectives of the FRM, the breakdown of the curriculum, and focus on the parts of their job that relate to concepts from the FRM. We are not asking candidates to submit a resume that says they are the chief risk officer at Bank of America. Okay, we understand that maybe you're going to be working as an assistant analyst on a trading desk, or maybe you're going to be a credit analyst within a bank in their lending department, whether it's corporate lending or retail lending, somewhere along those lines, or working for a company in the real economy, doing their accounting functions. Okay, accounting, you can apply it. You need to just highlight or emphasize those areas as they relate to the FRM curriculum. That'll get you the certification, because we're very holistic in our review of resumes. And then it also signals to the employer that you have a skill set, you've worked in the real world, you have some perspective too. That's the other thing. When you go to school, you don't have actual real world perspective. And sometimes that alone is sufficient. I mean, when I went to school again 100 years ago, you needed to have worked before, MBA programs wouldn't take you right out of undergraduate. And now so many students are going right from undergrad to their master's degree or their MBA, which is a decision, and it's a personal one. And schools are accepting them. They don't have the experience or the perspective. So they may not get as much out of it as someone with just a little bit more.
Because they know exactly what to look for and what to absorb or how to apply. So a little funny question, which space or domain in the risk management is going to pay the highest?
I don't know this for a fact. However, if I had to guess, I would say market risk.
Okay.
But that's a guess on my part. I do not have that kind of data. But the more technical, I apologize. There's construction going on outside my window. I hope it's not ruining the recording.
No.
But more technical things, I think, will generally command a higher salary. Fair or not.
Okay. So now moving forward, do you recommend students to go for internships while they are studying FRM during their undergrad study? Or would you expect them to complete the exam and then immediately go for a job instead of going for an internship or so?
Well, an internship can be really invaluable across the board. Leaving the FRM aside for a moment, if you're in school and there is an internship opportunity, I personally would jump all over that. I think that they can be very important because they can show you earlier on, where your strengths lie, where your interests lie. If it's a well-structured internship, by the way, because I do know that sometimes internships, depending on the company, you don't get very involved. It's hard to really accomplish anything. But a well-structured internship can be very, very informative for an individual about where they might want to go. It also provides you with contacts, because that's another important part of the job search it's sad to say, but it's who you know and who
Yes.
you've met and things of that nature. And so those kind of contacts can be made during internships. If you don't have an internship, if you're not, they don't have to have the whole FRM if they have part one and they use that as leverage for an entry-level position. Perhaps their employer would even sponsor them for part two.
Right.
It occurs. But students, the other reason why, even though the FRM was never designed with students in mind, I find students are good candidates because you all still know how to study. You know how to take a book that's this thick and pull the, important information out of it. Whereas working professionals, you have to remember study skills.
Yes.
I once was interviewing for a job that required you take standardized tests first before they funneled you. And I was only a year or two out of college at the time. So they told me test. I came with number 2 pencils. There were people who obviously had been out of school for, a decade. And they're sitting there with their pens going, wait, what? I needed a pencil? I'm like, they said standardized test. You come with a pencil. Who doesn't know that? You got the bubbles, the Scantrons. So, students can say, here's this book. Here's what I need to know. I can pull this out. And you also have the time.
Yes.
That's the other question for candidates. We have many FRMs that studied for the exam as working professionals. I used to see people on the train commuting with their FRM books. I used to go, oh, I work on that exam. Working professional, they don't, especially if they're in consulting, they might be traveling, their time constraints are a little different. And students, it might give them a bit of an advantage, to be honest, that they are in school.
Since you mentioned about it is, unfortunately or fortunately, it is about whether you know the right people, whether you know you are a part of those circles and all. So just a follow-up question on that. Do we see any networking opportunities for the FRM candidates in India, let's say?
Oh, I'm glad you asked about that. That is one of the whole reasons for GARP's existence, to be really honest with you, Aswini, is to provide community and connection. And regardless of what any of you do in your future life, if there's a professional membership association attached to what you want to do, join it, because it is an easy connector. We have a directory, our certified community that is searchable, and you can look people up. We have chapters globally. We absolutely have, I'm looking it up right now, where exactly. We have a chapter in Mumbai. I believe there might be another one coming to India, but I don't want to say definitively because that is not my region. And so I apologize, but I think, Mumbai, Delhi, and Bangalore. Thank you to my colleague who quick pinged me with that little tidbit of information. So they are coming. And as I said, the whole intent is to provide opportunities for networking, making those connections. And it can be very important. If you find you meet someone who's just a little further on the career ladder than you, they can be very helpful.
Yes.
And any sort of connection in that regard, plus being a member in an association and attending chapter meetings and things of that nature, it signals to your employer that you're serious about the field. It signals to them that you're interested in learning more about your field. I'm literally scrolling right down now. We've had some recent chapter meetings. Now, during COVID, it was much easier for people to attend globally, but now we're going back to in-person events, which can give you a chance to work on those communication skills. Again, I know that they're hard, and it's a really good way to try and make those connections, work on those skills.
Absolutely. And wonderful to hear about the new chapter opening up in India. And this is more or less it from my side, with all the questions, everything answered and sorted. I have a couple of questions from the students over here. So one question is the scope for FRM narrower than CFA? So there's a comparison we're trying to make with regards to?
Oh, Oh, sure. No, I'm happy to talk about it. I know. And thank you for asking that question, because I give so many presentations where students are afraid to ask me. It's like they're like, "Ooh, would that be bad?" No, here's the story. I'm going to enlarge that to talk about, certifications in general. Okay. I will not badmouth the CFA. I do not have my charter. I went for an MBA instead because I wanted a teacher in front. I wanted the professor telling me when stuff was due. I didn't want to study on my own. But they have an excellent broad-based curriculum. Okay. I liken the CFA to an MBA. It covers a whole lot from soup to nuts. The FRM comparatively is more like an MSc, a specialized degree that's a little more focused in nature. FINRA is a financial regulator here in the U.S., and they have their own requirements. I'm sorry, Aswini, I'm answering the question because it just popped up in front of me while we're talking about certifications.
Yeah.
But so the FRM is more specialized, similar to Kaya, the alternate investment certification. So those are, again, going to take a deeper dive, a closer look at certain areas within finance. We see if I pulled up our database of FRMs, I would find so many people with multiple certifications. And what often happens is that if you're not sure where you want to be in finance, a lot of people will start off with their CFA, and that's absolutely fine. I would never say, no, don't do that. Don't get your CFA charter. But what happens is they start working, and as your career evolves, maybe you end up in a risk role somehow and you go, ooh, I need to bump up these skills. I need to be a little more focused in this area. And then they pursue the FRM, and it will still be here, And so that, again, is a conscious career decision. FINRA certifications or FINRA exams are required under SEC regulations. So that's going to depend on the position you have, what exams you would need to pass. For example, my husband is a bond trader. He has several series, Series 7, Series 63, and he has a couple of them. And those are required by SEC regulations.
We have one last question. So is FRM a good option for a student in the second year, basically an undergrad student while pursuing graduation? Would it be a good idea to start FRM, or should the student wait until graduation is complete?
Only whenever you are not precluded from sitting for the FRM, you could sit for the FRM as an undergrad. It's not a problem. Two things I will say to caveat that. One is the quantitative nature of the FRM Part 1 is pretty strong. It's been benchmarked at a level of a master's degree, not as a substitute, but just pedagogically, a master's degree. So please be careful in your, quantitative stuff. It take you a little more to level up to that, but you're welcome to do so. The other caveat I will point out is that there are time constraints. So when you pass Part 1, you have 4 years to pass Part 2, and then you have 5 years from passing Part 2 to document your 2 years of work experience. So this doesn't happen often, but if students start really early in their career, they may find themselves bumping up against the deadline. I was at a university presentation, and here a candidate had sat for Part 1 as an undergrad, then went and got a master's, and then was in the middle of their PhD program. And there was no way that they were going to get to that job experience in time. And you want to age out of the system, because then you have to start over. And no one wants to do that twice. No one. Crazy people want to do that twice. So that would be the only caution I would have for students.
Yeah. So are there possibilities of remote jobs in the risk space for FRM students? The reason why I think the student, because I got this question twice actually, the reason why they're asking probably is that in a risk, the data becomes quite sensitive and possibly there are less remote jobs available. So is there anything that you can highlight over here?
Remote. We're focusing on remote. Well, it's funny. I was just reading an article in the journal yesterday about companies pulling people back to 5 days a week, listing some of the companies, one of which is JP Morgan, depending on what area you work in. Now, having said that, I do know people at JP that don't go into the office 5 days a week. I think remote versus in-person has less to do with the specific, is more of a company situation. Some companies have just determined that they are going to do hybrid work, fully remote. I don't see the data security as being as big of an issue.
Okay.
People, they have their
Mhm.
systems in place, which they should, for heaven's sake. I think that would still be, available to them. I think it's more of an industry and a senior management issue.
Right,
There
right.
seems to be a bit of a disconnect between the remote and the in the office.
No, I think it's quite important, if not entirely 100% attendance at the office, but maybe a hybrid approach. But 100% remote jobs, I believe, is quite depressing from my opinion, wherein you don't have that interpersonal skills and the soft skills you're possibly not able to develop. So,
And an early career,
yes,
you learn by seeing what other
yes,
people do. I mean, trading desks. I could never work on a trading desk. It would give me a headache. People are yapping all day long, but they're right there. They're literally sitting on top of each other, and you're going to absorb so much information that you're not going to get sitting at home by yourself having meetings on Zoom. So I know it's a hard balance.
thank you so much, Lisa, for this and to
You're
take
very
out time.
welcome.
And particularly
No
enjoyed the
problem.
session given that educator connect that we were able to have while teaching. So, absolute pleasure to have you address all the questions. You've exhausted all the questions that we started with. So, thank you so much for the insightful
You're
session
very
for the
welcome.
students. Thank
No
you.
problem. Thank
Looking
you.
forward to
Bye-bye.
one more very soon.
Cool.
Thank you.
Thanks.